So the aim of this next session...
everyone, we need to carry on because we don't have much time.
So the aim of this next part of the presentation is to just take you through some of the data and some of the insights. And I think this will answer some of your other questions around the system. So...
Noel, maybe we could do that a little bit later.
So this slide shows the relationships in terms of the partnership approach that's taken to the delivery of public transport, and its core leaders are identified in each of those sections. So the Regional Council has this role of planning, procuring and operating. The operations are led by our contracted service providers, and we have 4 who are identified there. All of the bus stops, bus lanes, bus shelters, and so on are owned and maintained by territorial local authorities. There's, as you have already identified, the need for a really close working relationship with all of those bodies so that the system itself operates well. When a route change or when a new route is launched, there's a need to install the infrastructure to support it, for example. In the case of Hamilton City, as a good example, there are also investments in things like traffic signal operations, and we're using GPS feeds from buses to track through their traffic signal systems, and so on. So we've had a presentation to the Regional Transport Committee in the last 12 months, which has given us some insight into, the Future-Proof PT Subcommittee, given us some insight into the types of things Hamilton have been doing to get buses through congested areas, but there's always more that could be done. But just an example.
On that, are they tracking the stopping of the traffic with in-lane bus stops and seeing how long they hold up the traffic and so on?
We've had inquiries about journey times prior to those being installed and journey times for buses after. They would be tracking general traffic. We've been tracking bus traffic. So,
Yep, Ben.
Oh, just to clarify, in terms of the bus drivers, we contract and pay them directly, or the bus contractors have them because we had when their pay goes up, we have to pay, don't we? So can you explain that?
So you mean the indexing with NZTA?
driver pay question about how the contract is set up and the flow through of dollars in terms of bus driver wages.
Yeah, just in response, Councillor Ben, the operators employ the drivers and pay their salaries, but as part of the contract that council signs up to, the labour rate is a core component of what we're buying there. It is tagged to the indexation quarterly indexation, which includes a labour component. So by inference, we are contributing to that as things progress through the life of that contract. But I think what you were referring to before was when there was the fair pay agreements under the previous government and the wage uplift negotiation that came about with that. There was a step change in the wage rates at that time. That said, when we go out to tender coming into the new year, there will be a workforce component in the sort of evaluation criteria that we ask the market to price. So there is sort of that visibility there, if that makes sense.
Does that answer your question, Ben? Chris, very briefly, and then we need to move on.
My question is related to that. Trudy, can you just confirm that they're not paid salaries, please?
In response, yes, I will correct that. It's an hourly rate.
Thank you. And they're not paid at airline pilot in relativity sense?
No.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Right, let's move on.
Okay, so we won't dwell on this too long, but these are our current networks. So you can see there the rail, but also the current Hamilton urban bus network, and then a list of the regional routes. As I've said, those have transitioned over time, and many of those do come into Hamilton, but all of the C to T, for example, don't. Here is just one of the insights that we've reported to committees via our operations reports. Just from a sample 2025 Q2, the patronage over that quarter and where that patronage is occurring across each of the units of operation, which are different from the bus routes themselves, but they show you some of those broad changes, and in that case, a slight decline over that quarter. Also, the ticket type, and again, the changes there. And interesting in that example, an increase in the tertiary ticket, which I'm guessing aligns with the universities coming back or something like that. Patronage by route, again, picking Q2 2025, you can see what we get on each of our routes. And picking up Councillor Smith's comment, the Northern Connector, the Te Awamutu and the Cambridge services are routes 4, 5 and 6 on that list. So they are of significant patronage, and they are routes that occur outside Hamilton and come into Hamilton. This is updated frequently and will be part of your operations pack, but this just gives you some insight into, particularly on the left-hand side, the high patronage on our higher frequency routes, the Orbiter, the Meteor and the Comet, among other things. Patronage by time over the years, this just goes back 4 or 5 years, but it shows you firstly the impact of COVID and then the climb that there has been back up. And then from 2024 onwards, starting to see potentially some of the impacts of fare increases, but also the economic cycle. Nationally, PT numbers are down nationally currently. But gives you some insight into some of that longer term patronage across all passengers. By territorial authority, we have Hamilton in its own section at the top, and then each of the other districts lower down, and you can get a sense of the patronage numbers there at a district level. You're unlikely to be able to see too much of that, so I won't dwell on it too much, but it gives you a sense of the scale of patronage in the Hamilton area versus elsewhere, and then at a district level. Bus satisfaction as it stands and rail satisfaction as it stands are there just to give you some insight into the levels of positive feedback that we get. And then just to finish this section, we've utilised the NZTA monetised benefits manual to come up with some numbers for the 24-25 year that give you a sense of the, I guess, the benefit cost value for money calculation. So our spend in that year was 45.8. Our network travelled over 7 million kilometres on 39 routes. We had, from the B card only, rather than B card and cash, over 80,000 passengers who took over 4 million trips. That included 1 million trips by children and youth and 500 trips by retirees. Using that manual, we've identified that the direct benefits of that investment of 45.8 equated to a 12 million road traffic reduction benefit and a 68 million PT user benefit, a total of 80 million against our spend of 45.8. And then the manual has identified several other indirect benefits around accessibility, access to jobs, inclusivity, transport resilience and sustainability. Now, this is the type of information we want to be bringing to the committee and having conversations about this from a value for money perspective. Okay, so that's the end of that section.
Okay. Keith, I see your light on.
Yeah, just picking up from your value for money and patronage and that sort of thing, Phil. Do we do any correlation between pressure on the infrastructure versus the value of public transport? Because I know Chris will chew my ear, but I really feel that we've got a congestion problem in Hamilton, peak transport areas. And if we were to load a sort of a toll at peak points in Hamilton, we could really push public transport to get the public transport working more efficiently to reduce the congestion. So it's a discussion that we shouldn't be doing in silos. We talk about infrastructure, we talk about public transport, but they actually are connected together. So do you have any thoughts on that, or any discussion that's been going on?
Yeah, there have been lots of discussions, and the metro spatial plan that I mentioned at the beginning is where the package of infrastructure and services and how they are delivered together is very much part of that thinking. So I've got a slide on that, the work of the Future-Proof Transport Working Group later, which will just show you some of the things that have been worked.
Yeah, thanks for those points, Keith. I know that park and rides were also in previous troniums been quite a hot topic as well. So for those people maybe coming into Hamilton who don't want to drive within Hamilton, they can, park and jump on a bus and avoid those perhaps future congestion charging if that's where the city's going with those. Over to Ben.
Could we go back one slide or two slides? Next one, that one. Next part.
Next one.
Back, forward again. That one. It's very interesting to see that the patronage has not fallen, given that the fares have almost doubled in that period.
We believe it's starting to have an impact. This is a quarter 3 2025. Yeah, we're not seeing major reductions at this point, but there's a risk, and this is the annual plan conversation. There's a risk that the more you do that, the higher the risk is. I think Vince wants to.
But the point is, the government is forcing us to increase the local share, so we're not doing it by choice. But I would have thought you would have seen a significant reduction from 2022, 23, when it's going to be 18% or 9% in 22, 18% in 2026. That's quite significant in terms of, and it hasn't in the other districts as well. So, thank you.
Yep, if I can add, like over the last 3 or 4 years, there has been quite a bit of improvement to our network as well. So we have introduced Comet, Meteor, and as well as the Y-path changes in terms of the increased frequencies and EVs. So there's a suite of improvement over that same period. So that in some way that sort of reduced the impact of fare changes. But really, like over the last 12 months, there hasn't been any service improvement. So we are seeing a bit of decline in terms of patronage, especially since the new fare changes implemented on 1 July. So like this in the Q3 this year, we are seeing a decline of 4% in terms of patronage.
Thanks, Ben. Noel, and then Robbie.
Well, a general question in relation to the Metro Spatial Plan. I was there at the start, maybe 5, 6 years ago, when we started sort of talking about boundaryless planning. I know it will go on forever, but when do we actually see a crystallised piece of paper that says this is the Metro Spatial Plan, right in the sand? Because it seems to be a beast that just keeps feeding itself and going on and on. And is there a document that says this is the spatial plan, or are we still yet to get to that?
So the process that you went through at that time was to create what was called a program business case, which set out a load of a range of aspirations, and from that then follows a heap of work to decide exactly what each of those is. And there's been Hamilton, well, that's been happening since, and there's been work most recently done on freight corridors and bus rapid transit corridors, and we've done all of the bus network review work that we've done over the last 12 months is our contribution to the Metro Spatial Plan. In reality, where the rubber hits the road is what goes into long-term plans, and the opportunity or the element to leave in your minds is that we are in the process of proceeding to a different bus network to achieve the outcomes of the MSP. We need our partners to be there to fund the infrastructure to deliver it reliably and consistently so that we don't have buses caught in traffic. And that's where the tension is, and the conversations that feed into things like the regional public transport plan from this new committee and into the external committees is about how do we get the investment in infrastructure to support the investment we're making in services.
So with the review of the transport planning, buses, etc., that means surely that the settlement patterns, residential, industrial, etc., have also been settled in advance of that. Surely that would come first. And
so
then
Future Proof redid that work and updated its priority development areas, and then Fast Track came about. And I think Fast Track is creating some challenges for that.
some challenges for sure. Okay.
Yeah, but the prior to Fast Track, the priority development areas were set, and Future Proof strategy was reset with all of those details in it.
Yeah, Fast Track's another issue. I see this trying to put a swamp into housing, so I can't. Some of the things happening in that. Thanks.
Yeah, you raised some good points, Noel, and the other sort of spanner in the works from the last funding round was that the GPS changed slightly, and our Rotatuna Express, which we were planning within Hamilton, wasn't funded, so that's put us on the back foot a little bit. But yeah, we'll wait for the next funding round on that one. Robbie.
My question was that the 45.6 million doing 7 million kilometres works out at $6.50 a kilometre travelled, I'd imagine, as a running K of operation. Well, that's basically what the operation costs is $6. Like if that was put out to transport or what we've cost to freight our food around the country, most probably your food would go up 50% because they're most probably working on a margin of half of that. So I seriously, we've got to look at, it's not the service, it's actually what it's costing us. And you've got to seriously consider if we electrify these buses or other things going forward, that cost is likely to halve or double again. So these numbers are pretty serious.
I'd like to add to that and just follow up on Robbie's point because he makes a good point. And I get a real problem with when I hear staff and people saying improvement in service, and they only use, I have a real problem around this word improvement and how do they quantify improvement? So based on Robbie's numbers, I've just broken down those numbers just a little bit further. If you take your bus route 21 Northerner, it works out at 8.2 passengers per trip if you take your scheduling. And if you also take the per kilometre cost further down and you have 0.4 passengers per kilometre, it actually works out at $16.05 per passenger per kilometre. So, I can cart fertiliser, a tonne of fertiliser cheaper than that.
Put that to a supermarket of what they're charging you for your food. Your food would nearly go up half again in price. That's what I'm just.
Correct. And the issue is, I think what we need to look at, there are other services, I just had a quick discussion with Liz about some stuff, but we need to be certain that we're actually providing value for money for the public, or are we better off just to say, let's hands off, and I know you're mandated by the Crown to do stuff, so I get all that, but at what point do we say the private sector should take over because this is just dumb stuff, or will we rebuild the model, and have a good look at what we do, how we do, and why we do?
Thank you. No.
Look, I sympathise with Gary's comments. The reality is, years ago, I used to think that we shouldn't have benefits and all that. And then I joined the police and then I saw the worst of the world and why people need to have a minimum standard. And I reluctantly accepted long ago that we needed the likes of public transport because there are people that haven't got the need. And that then brings the cost onto those of us who can afford to pay a little bit of tax or rates, etc. And it's a balancing act. So I absolutely agree. And I'm more blue than I am red or green. So it grates me to say it, but public transport is a necessary evil. And, it's a matter of making it as efficient as we can. So I think that's the pressure on us.
Yep.
So, and I think Robbie's point exactly, it's costing too much. And while we've only got 2 contractors, They're screwing us because it's really a cartel. So how we break that, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a nationwide issue because we're pretty much left with almost a duopoly nationwide. All right, we will keep going.
So just on your final comment there, Noel, the pre-market engagement that went live this week does actually pre-market engagement with suppliers for future bus contracts actually poses some challenges there around the concept of bundling, which actually prevents an operator getting more than a certain amount of all of the contracts. So we're testing that now, and in March or through the next series of Transport Committee conversations, we want to bring that to you so that you can have conversations about how you achieve some of those things within these future contracts.
So can I just ask a question on that then, if I may, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Our Transport Committee works ahead of the RTC meetings by the sounds of things. So are we realistically going to be dictating the regional services and contracts, etc.? Because we will sign the contracts off as a council, not on recommendation of RTC. Just if you've got time to just give a 101 on how it's going to work.
You are the funder, you are the public transport authority, you are the decision maker.
RTC, what input does that have?
From a public transport delivery perspective, they have no role.
Okay.
But you may choose to use the public transport subcommittee to contribute to your decision making as you wish.
Yeah. So yeah, more of a partnership role. And of course, it's on all of us to represent our local view as well, in conjunction with those members on the PT subcommittee as well. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, looking regionally, but holding local as well at the same time. Jen, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just wanted to push back for a minute on or just broaden the conversation. A necessary evil is certainly one way you could look at it, but the other side of it is that it can be a wonderful thing, right? And there are a lot of people who either can't drive or don't want to, or perhaps shouldn't do because they're not that good at it. And this keeps us safe as a public good when they are on the bus. And I know many of us don't use the bus that much, and I would like to a lot. It's just that it's so highly inconvenient. Those costs I sympathise with as well, and I just wanted to bring the other side of the coin in that it's like a startup in that when it's been treated like this necessary evil for so long, and it isn't that great, you've got all the startup costs, you've got all the overheads, but you don't have the patronage to make really good numbers. So my vision for public transport, especially in Hamilton, where you've got half of our whole community essentially, is that we've got to make it so good that it is a better way to get around, like in any city that you travel around the world. And then those numbers are going to look really good. I realize that it's always to a degree subsidized, but we get those benefits. And I'd like, Phil, you to outline those for us from time to time as well.
Thank you, Jen. Ben.
I just wanted to ask about the electrification of bus contracts and the next round of contracts. Is that coming up shortly? Yep. So yeah. I'll ask when I get there.
Excellent. Good segue. We'll move on to that one.
Okay, so this next section of the discussion really is the final one. There's quite a bit in this, and we may not get to all of it, but I just wanted to take you through some of the things that we're doing to respond to some of the things that you've said, noting that there will, plenty of opportunity for more discussion as time goes on. So I'll just start going through this and we'll see how we get on. This is a page from the regional PT plan that set out an aspirational service level for different types of service in different types of location. I don't really want to get into the detail in the slide, but it at the time was attempting to say that we should operate 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. We should operate so many services peak and so many services off peak, and try to set some consistent service levels for different types of service, again in Hamilton and then the metro area and then outside that. That's been our guide so far, and question for you all to consider is what does the future of that table look like? Because that's actually where the rubber hits the road for us in terms of designing services and levels of access to services and all of those things. So I'll just leave that for you to ponder. Just touch on a few of the things that we've been doing around optimisation and improvement. So we do work closely with councils and we are talking to them constantly about infrastructure, and that's all councils, but particularly the Hamilton urban area. We do make regular changes to bus services to address identified challenges such as light late running, or in some cases the safety of a driver in an industrial area at 10 o'clock at night, and all of those things. So there's a constant change to our network, and you may not see much of it, and aspects of it really don't get any promotion, but there's a constantly change being made. We've talked about demand responsive services and flex, night flex. We've talked about airport flex. They're all parts of us testing new options and trialing new ideas. That will continue. We've changed Tahuya quite significantly from it when it was first launched, and the new Sunday is a good example of that. The new bus contracts for Waipa were a big step change for us in that they tested both increased frequency to those Cambridge and Te Awamutu communities, but also additional hours of operation. We trialled double deckers on those routes, and we've switched to EV on those routes, which included us working with the district council to build EV depots on their land as part of that work. So that contract is a very significant test for us in terms of the way that we work with districts around those types of things and how the EV transition rolled out. So you may not have been aware of all of those aspects of that, which just looks like a load of new buses, but actually was a very significant change to a whole bunch of things and how we operate. Parts of that fed into our conversation with you about EV depots, which I'll get to in a minute. As part of the work ahead of the future contracts, we did strategic bus reviews, which we're required to do every few years, both in Hamilton, but across all of those areas, northeast, west, Waikato. And those proposals came through that technical process, then fed into the PT Pathways document, which was what the committee saw as part of understanding the desire for future networks. And that was what then went out for public consultation. So this process of constant review feeding into community engagement was consistent with the approach we've taken. We've had, most recently, we've had some Taupo consultation open around some changes to services down there. So this is something that we're doing constantly. And then the zero emissions roadmap, which comes about from that technical work around the transition to EV. I'll keep going.
I've just got a question for you.
Yeah, I was just going to touch just on the Waipa contract, because obviously I was on the other side of the council at that time. And I just want to make a point around the number of contractors who put in a bid for the Waipa contract. Was how many, Phil? It was a small number. It was a really small number. And I think herein lies the issue. And that when we go out for contract for the rest of the services, because Waipa is now done, there are a very limited number of people who will be able to put in a contract. There's an enormous cost. So, and I think that herein lies a lot of what we're talking about is around who can provide that service, who can actually do that, has a means to do that. I just wanted to make that point really clear, because I think you touched on it before, Phil, but for me, that's a really key thing. I think at one point we didn't have anyone who was going to be able to provide the services. It was a very late contract, but Trudy, you might be able to provide more insight.
I can. Yes, you are right, Councillor Liz. There were two bids to that tender process. But herein lies the approach we're taking this time is pre-engaging with the market. We have interest beyond New Zealand. So we've done market sounding, and now this pre-engagement is also, as I would term it, sort of warming up that market and making sure that we're giving plenty of time and relevant information well ahead of when we actually go into the bidding submission process. What the outcome be, what that different approach and what will lead to the outcome, who knows? But look, we're taking that different approach, as you quite rightly pointed out, with the limited interest before.
So if the outcome is no different, what that really means is that we cannot really make any significant change to the status quo. And there's not really a lot around this table we can do unless we come up with a new model or decide to do things significantly different. But I think it's worthwhile, really interested to hear that there's international, we'll call it international, interest. But if that doesn't come off, then yeah, we may just be stuck in the same wheel that we're in now.
Yeah, good points, Liz. Did you want to respond to that? No? Okay. Keith and then Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Trudy, I am going to ask you the question. How much is the reluctance to tender for these contracts is because the criteria that we put on them are just too onerous? And what I'll use, which goes into my experience with ICM and contractors doing work for ICM. Regional Council puts a huge number of impediments to productive performance and rules and regulations there. And I wonder whether that is part of the reluctance to apply, because Gary could put a tractor and trailer with a whole lot of plastic seats on the back and do it for a quarter of the price. But in today's world, maybe not acceptable, but we can do a lot cheaper.
Yeah, what was your question, Keith?
How much do you think the impediments to the contracts are what we impose upon those that apply for the contracts to make it hard to fulfill the contract?
Yeah, I think that comes down to a nationwide, what the regulator and the standards for RUBS, is it cool?
Yep.
RUBS, it's too many acronyms. But yeah, so it's not just impediments that maybe our council puts in the way, but it's nationwide.
Perhaps I can comment, because it is nationwide, and going back to the funding model, we know we're getting 51% from the government, and all of our procurement has to meet the NZTA procurement mandate. So that's across the country, and so those stipulations come more from the likes of the RUB and the other. What we were operating for in 12 years under what we call public transport, the PTOM operating model, which has now shifted somewhat. It has relaxed some of those requirements, but it's also increased some of those in terms of what we also discussed earlier in terms of the driver wages and driver wages. So it was sort of under PTOM was when we saw a lot of the potential competition in the market, those mum and dad operators of bus companies get bought up and amalgamated into sort of fewer operators that we have now. And so it just is a reality that you're only ever going to attract potentially so many people unless, as council has done now, has tested the market and looked for the opportunities.
Awesome, thank you. I do have Ben, Mikhail and Chris, and we do have a huge number of slides to get through as well. So if we can keep our questions succinct, that would be appreciated.
It's just to pick up Liz's point about lack of competition with WIPA. Obviously, that means there's going to be even more chance for cost increases rather than less in this new tendering round. Secondly, that we're mandated to do electrification of bus fleet by 2035, and that this time round, the new contractor is going to have to provide the land, the electrification, as well as the buses, as I understand it. So, whereas WIPA, at least the council provided the land. So that's, yeah, but there's not that generosity here. And Furthermore, while you're going through this contracting process, the regional council is potentially going to disappear partway through that process in 2029, and it might be a CCO. So they're having to sign a contract with an entity that might not even be here anymore. So it's interesting times in terms of that process.
Yeah, very, very interesting times, but I'm sure.
So I'll get to
staff
that,
have it
a
in
few
here.
slides on that in a moment, if that's okay.
On mine will just be on to add on to Liz and Ben's. There is actually two models because Palmerston North 102 was another model that the contractors went in and they provided all the infrastructure and stuff like that. So these two models, YPAR and, you could use that. I'm not sure. I knew that was one that came through. There might be others now. So it'll be interesting to see the costings and everything on those two models. And then, if, the numbers don't add up, then we could go to Gary's where we look at a new model. But I think there is, even though there's only a few that are attending for that, there is models out there like Palmerston and Waipā that, without giving up that land, they've obviously, the contractors organised the land themselves in Palmerston. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. You make some good points. And I do recall at that EV workshop that we had, there was a whole spectrum was presented and we came to some sort of decision. Right, Chris, and then we will move on.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Trudy, can you just confirm that somebody's been through the regulatory standards bill, which is very recent, and does that have any impact whatsoever, regulations in relation to loosening them up, tendering of public transport services? And if you haven't, could you refer that to NZTA, because they're the ones that are the regulator, they're the ones that should be reviewing that and your feedback, because I'd hate to think that we're tendering on something which is obsolete in terms of regulations.
Yeah, good question, Chris. I think we'll leave staff to come back to you on that one. I'm not sure we have that right to hand, okay? Yep, we will move on, but we've made a note of that one as well, Chris. Thank you.
So 3 slides and then we'll get into the bus contracts. Just really for your awareness, and I don't plan on taking you through this, but we did some work on a passenger experience roadmap a year or so ago, and this went through the committees, and it's part of us assessing the way that we engage with our different user groups, and a description of personas has been a helpful way of helping to set out what each of those groups needs by way of the way that we engage with them and the approach that we take to attract them to public transport services. So we can share that with you and go through it in more detail, but it's been a really useful approach to helping us prioritise the way that we want to engage with customers and the way that we take forward the way that we promote public transport is a good example. You'll be aware that this year we are rebranding or going through a process of redesign of the public transport brand. Busset was launched in 2005, and we are currently working with a contractor who is taking us through the process that's described here to define what public transport is for the whole region across all of the different types of public transport that we have. And we will look to launch that within the new contracts after the LTP, so from mid-27 onwards, rather than changing things up front. But that would include vehicles, infrastructure, and then all of our engagement tools with our customers. National ticketing is, sorry. Yeah.
So what's the budget for that? Approximately?
Council, okay.
500,000, is it? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep, no, that's fine. Let's move on.
So national ticketing is coming and is now. National ticketing is coming, and it has now been launched in urban Christchurch following a trial of the Christchurch Airport service. You'll have seen public statements from the Minister and those involved in the transition that's being led by Cubic, following an independent review that they did, and that has included a reassessment of the process of achieving this across the whole country. There are a series of stage technology rollouts. So Canterbury has launched with a basic system that will be improved over time. The government's statement is that that will be fully operational by the end of 2027, and the Waikato timeframe within that time between now and the end of 2027 is becoming more clear, but hasn't been announced. So we're working based on an understanding.
Just to note,
High
Wellington's
level.
gone alone and said that this morning they announced they're doing their own ticketing system. They're sick of waiting, don't believe it's going to happen. So
Who's that? Sorry.
Wellington. Okay. So let's spend a bit of time on bus contracts then. So for those of you who weren't part of the discussions over the last 18 months, we went through a process of the technical work that led to the design of future bus networks, as we've talked about. We've undertaken public consultation on those. Council confirmed its approach to the way it wants the zero emission vehicle transition and the zero emission asset discussions to proceed. And as I've mentioned, we're on pre-procurement engagement with the market suppliers at the moment via GETS, and I sent an email to you all about that last week. Go live dates that are there. The next 6 months is a significant period of time for that contract, and there will be multiple updates to you all via the committee as that process unfolds. Your meetings in early 2026 will help shape up what goes out to procurement, and then your meetings from that point on will be around the process. This is a council decision. It's a significant sum, and it's over a long period of time. It can't be made anywhere else. So we need zero emission bus. Yeah. So that will result in new bus networks for Hamilton, North Waikato, East Waikato, West Waikato, Hauraki and Thames Coromandel. I will move on quickly. There was a significant conversation about the 2035 target of being zero emissions at that point, and council in its direction was that it wanted to get to that point at the right time rather than intentionally front-footing it and investing in a zero emissions network on day one with these new contracts. And that's the approach that's been taken through all of this conversation. At the same time, I'll put maybe a slide on this in a moment, you wanted us to allow the market to direct the first batch of asset investment, but you wanted there to be mechanisms for future transfer of that. And you supported some more technical work being done on the best long-term solutions around assets. That's the approach that we're taking. So there'll be some further work, probably in year one of the next long-term plan to do that thinking. In order to be co-funded, I'll just do this one.
You finish.
In order to be co-funded, we've already mentioned that our contracts must comply with the procurement strategy requirements from NZTA and demonstrate cost efficiency. They, under the standards, are 9-year contracts with the potential to extend. And the approach, as I've said, is that we are taking an approach of flexibility for operators to meet the objectives of the Regional Council, including those depots over time. I've got some maps of things in a moment. I want to pause there.
Yeah. Robbie, then Keith, then Gary.
Yeah, thank you. I've got real concerns of the capability of actually energy to power these electric buses. Myself and Chair Maher over the other side were sitting with an Auckland councillor a couple of weeks ago, and they actually said the grid capacity in Auckland actually isn't there to run their electric buses at the moment. So the feasibility of actually running these electric buses, it needs to be decided if it goes off the table really quickly, if there isn't actually enough power in the grid to power these electric buses or not, so we can actually get to making a decent decision. So I'd like to know is there capability in our grid to run 100% electric buses? And if there's not, then we should actually start thinking about a different approach to transport.
So the technical work did that assessment and said, yes, there is. And for the Hamilton area, that assessment was done in conjunction with the power companies, and they said, yes, there is.
Thank you. Keith?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Following on from Robbie, I'm concerned about the target, particularly as we are in a huge position of change in terms of the local body reorganisation and the capital cost involved. I noticed that the Auckland tugs and ferries are now going back to the hybrids and hybrids. No, they've gone from pure electric to hybrids. Yeah. So my contention is that we reevaluate, and rather than go full electric, we go to hybrids as a transitional stage. And we need to do that work now.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm basically in the same vein, and I want to know if we can revisit that research, Phil. In particular, I really keen to see the data and research on the energy side of it, the energy supply, because I've got real concern around that. The unintended consequences. Also want to know what happens if you don't meet point 2, cost efficiency. So if they can't supply at a cost efficient price or rate, what happens? Does that hold and go? So basically, I also want to know whether there's an ability to review the whole thing, what you've laid out, and go back to sweating some of the assets. So one step further than what Keith is saying, and sweating some of the assets we already have going forward to get all that work done properly, in my opinion.
Thank you. Noted. Gary?
Well, maybe a comment would be that the national direction on this, while it has evolved slightly, has remained relatively straight. So the direction of travel from government to NZTA and NZTA to us is broadly unaltered. We have some discretion, but the specification of future vehicles and future networks is to some extent obligated on us as part of our PTA responsibilities. So what we've done so far has been attempted to find the best outcomes at the lowest price for our communities, with the lowest cost to us as ratepayers from investment in new technologies. And the challenge now is that we have already had to go through a several-month process with NZTA around extending our existing contracts to achieve these new dates. I don't know that we have an enormous amount of headroom. We've definitely got time to engage with you and make sure that what goes out to the market and then what we approve reflects what you want. But there isn't probably 2 years to do a whole load of new work along all the lines of what we've already done. But we've already shared some of that with you in the pre-reading pack and things like that technical study around networks. I'm very happy to share that to give you some sense of the work that has been done. But we've got to find a way forward here relatively fast.
Gary?
There's some rapid advances being made lately, especially this year now with hydrogen. Has the team seriously looked at hydrogen? And also it can be produced locally, zero emissions, and especially making use of like the solar farms that are going in, producing hydrogen. And there are trucks running up and down the country now, amazingly well powered by hydrogen. So the question there also with electric buses, as Robbie said, the availability of power is restricted, but hydrogen has got quite a big future by the look of it.
I think that has been considered by us, but also by other regions. And at this point, no region has gone into hydrogen. That's not to say that it isn't an ideal future technology, but no region nationally has gone into that technology at this point.
Chris Hughes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions, Phil. Firstly, have we received a response to the letter which was sent late Australian regarding zero emission buses and having that relaxed? And my second question is, what is the discretion? You said we've got some discretion now. Is that in response to our letter, or can you just explain what discretion do we have and what are the options? So that the councillors are aware of.
Yep. So no, there hasn't been a response to that letter that was sent to the Minister of Transport outlining your concerns around the obligation to transition without sufficient funding to do so. So no response to that letter. I guess you're more involved in the technical work, but the question of what level of discretion is there would be a good thing for you to think about.
So in terms of discretion, I think from NZTA perspective, I think they would be more relaxed around the average fleet age. So if, for example, operator intend to kind of tender with the older diesel buses, so I think that the TA would be willing to look at the longer operating life for the existing fleet. So I think that's sort of the discretion leading up to the targets of 2035. I think that's still the target from the NZTA perspective, that all the bus fleet will need to be decarbonized by 2035.
No. Warren.
Thanks, Angela. A couple of points that have just been raised, but and just talking to Vincent's idea on what that discretion is, speaking to Dion Swiggs of Environment Canterbury, they have had permission from NZTA to sweat those assets for longer, which is what Vincent's talking to. And secondly, just Auckland is still running their hydrogen bus trial. Talking to Andy Baker the other day, so trying to get some facts and figures out of that in that space. But they are currently running a hydrogen bus trial, and I think they're at year 2 of 3 years.
Good.
Yeah, good to know. Chris, just to come back to your point, that letter that we did send, are you wanting us to follow up with that again, or?
I think we should, Andrew, because it's critical to our decision making going forward. But we can't just sit here and hope we're going to get an answer at some stage. Make decisions in the absence of an answer, because as Warren's suggesting, we might be going to get a much longer dispensation in terms of how long we can go sweating the asset.
Yep. Well, I think we take it as an action point. Chair Warren can resend the letter.
Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you. Right. Ben.
Yes. So firstly, in terms of the contract, I understand the new contract is for a 9 or 10 year period. It's not just for a 2-year period. So
no, all bus contracts are for 9 years.
Yes. So if we wanted to sweat the assets for 2 years, we're still going to have to sign up with a new provider for 9. And part of that will be a mandated electrification by 2035, which means they will have to start factoring in purchase of land, setting up the electricity supply ready for when the electric buses arrive. So my concern is that the cost of fares with all of that extra expenditure are possibly going to double. Might go from 18% to 30% fare costs because of the contract requiring all this extra infrastructure, which won't delay for 2 years. They'll start kicking it in the minute the contract signs. So that's a question. And then the other one obviously is in terms of discretion, can we sweat the assets for 2 years and then it's the mayors to make this decision? It's not us anymore. So.
Oh,
sorry. So my question on this was about the likely costs of signing a contract in terms of the infrastructure requirements and the electricity requirements that the contractor will be required to provide in that 9-year period.
Yeah, I guess in my opinion, it comes back to what Liz was saying before about what the market will deliver in terms of contractors who can actually do this work. We've got 2 big players who we already contract to within our region, who are both already providing electric buses within other regions. So, yeah, but I'll defer to
I don't mean to put Lorraine on the spot, but I just wondered from your experience elsewhere what the new contract numbers have been versus the old contract numbers, because the worry is that the new contracts will be significantly more expensive for the same.
Yeah. So we contracted in the last 3-year period to smaller contracts in Otago. And both of those, we gave the market the option of going up through to the time they could shift to electric. They both delivered electric from day one with providing the infrastructure. Both of those were in Dunedin. And I would say both the they were both two different operators, and both of them were setting themselves up because this is where the industry is going. They're looking to go electric. Newer members of the committee might not be aware that the government stopped the importation of new diesel buses last year, so you can only import new buses. So that's going to improve the economics of your running of your fleet. If you've got new electrics, they usually don't require any maintenance for 5 years. So that's where you get your saving in your contract costs over 9 years. Really different story in Queenstown, where the cost of land and proximity of servicing the metro bus network very, very high. So the setup costs very different for setting up a piece of land and infrastructure large enough to service the bus network. But the other thing is the metro fleet in Queenstown is probably quite small compared to the whole bus fleet, given the tourism operators there. And again, I say that the industry was kind of saying they're not interested in running diesel buses for the metro fleet because they have other interests in the tourism fleet and other services, intercity fleets and things like that, and they're just going electric. So that one is still playing out in Otago.
But just on that, they may actually want to start electric straight away, and the pricing could be at the electric rate, so did the costs in Queenstown significantly rise in terms of fares?
So that one's still playing out, but the Dunedin, where they didn't have this huge capital cost getting into the market, was entered into early and by the market by two different operators, and we got good savings in our contract prices. Both of them were able to make on two different smaller contracts, but deliver full electrics from day one with the infrastructure provided by the operator. Nothing additional. That's probably what more of the conversation that we're looking at for Queenstown. We're looking at, yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Lorraine. Gary, did you have anything else to add on this one, or?
Yeah, a little bit further on of what Warren was saying with Andy Baker and the hydrogen trial in Auckland. One of the benefits of hydrogen that they've had in Europe is that they can retrofit existing diesel buses to run on hydrogen as well. So when you're talking of sweating the assets, if you wanted to stretch the life of those diesel buses, retrofitting with hydrogen is feasible.
Yeah, Vincent, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I guess just with the upcoming tender, for us, we won't be specifying any energy source or energy type. So it's really up to market. So I guess our goal is to transition to ZEB by 2035. It's up to market to determine what will be the best technologies or pathway. So if they can tender with a good sort of, in terms of the hydrogen, if that's cost effective, yeah, we will definitely consider this proposal. So we are not setting any requirement around battery electric, hybrid, or any other sort of type of technology. It's really up to market to determine.
Cool. Thanks for that, Vincent.
So we might try and cover one more subject in the remaining 10 minutes, just so you've got something on something I know you've been asking about. So I'll flick through a few of these, but I wanted to just spend a few minutes on community transport. So this is where we fund external groups to deliver a service for communities within communities. That has proven in our region to fill gaps that buses don't reach, and it supports specific types of users, whether they're isolated residents who are elderly disabled, looking for a health service and other things. And it's helped build community connection as well as provide a service in areas that we haven't been successful in obtaining agency funding for example, the Coromandel is a good example. So we have a fund that is about to go out, as has already been mentioned, that is 100% funded by the regional council from that targeted rate for PT. We currently, within the previous funding rounds, have something like 30 providers around the region, and examples of those are the health shuttles that have already been talked about, as well as local trusts who are providing services within their own community. Examples of places that would benefit from this in the new round with the increased funding are effectively all of our rural communities, whether it's down through to Otorohanga, or whether it's up through into Port Waikato, or whether it's more services in the Coromandel or wherever. This is a growing area for us, and it's attracted a lot of attention. The forum that's mentioned there met yesterday, and the providers just come along to talk about, understand what we're doing, and then talk about what they're doing and how they can get the best value from each other. We have also organised a 2-yearly symposium where we've brought people in nationally to talk about their experience of this type of service and try and get some status, firstly, as a region that's really leading in this area, but secondly, build the knowledge of this type of service around the country.
Okay, Phil, just really quickly, this is currently not match funded with NZTA. Is there a pitch at the next NLTF to ask for match funding?
We tried that in the last NLTF and were declined. We will definitely try again.
Yeah, okay. Yep, no, that's good. Thank you. Liz.
Is there are there any more slides on this one? No. Okay. So I just wondered what kind of governance oversight around that contestable fund was. I just know that with some of the health shuttles that had been trialled in the King Country, the kind of, I think the community felt that there was some advertising or promotion lacking, and there just didn't seem. I was struggling, back in my day, just to work out who was looking after it, and my local councillors didn't know. So, what kind of governance oversight is over the services, but also the funding itself? Like once it's decided, I guess by staff who it should go to, does it come to a committee to be approved?
So the approach that's taken to apply for the funding has been set by that policy, which has been through council. The process has been led by staff, following some requirements around determining who are the bodies that are providing these services and making sure that they are legitimate. The successful candidates for the fund in previous years have been reported up through Regional Transport Committee, and then in this new triennium with these new committees, there's a conversation about where that should go. But that's been retrospective to the decisions being made. So if you want to change the policy in order for council to sign that off, that's a conversation to have within that policy review cycle. But if that's what you wanted to do, that would be great to have a conversation about that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think that's something that would need to happen for the next financial year.
Yeah, it's just highly unusual for that kind of large amount of money to not have real governance oversight. I was surprised that that fund was so high.
So maybe just a point on that is that this has been a fund that's grown rapidly. So it was 100,000, became 200,000 at the point that the long-term plan was approved, and then council itself opted to increase that fund to the current number within this financial year as part of the last year's annual plan. So yes, it's grown rapidly, and that's why the policy review is required.
Okay. Cool. Let's Ben.
Oh, sorry. Just on that 500K, From what I remember, there was concern that 200 of that was actually used for administration. Is that still the case?
No.
No, it's in addition to that. So 500 is the contestable fund, and then we pay a staff member and undertake things like the symposium and that number of other things within the other parts of that fund.
And that's approximately another 200K on top.
Roughly, yes.
Yeah. Earlier it was 300K was given out and 200 was staff, and it's
Gary.
My observation with the PTS service, having been fairly closely involved with some of the services there, is that by putting that money into PTS and helping people get to the hospitals, you're taking a lot of pressure off the overworked ambulance system at the moment, which is just totally out of this world overworked. So what I see there is being putting effort into that community service helps the community on the other side.
Yeah, good points. Alrighty. Any further questions on community transport? Okay, so probably the action points from, Chris?
Yeah, look, I just want to take issue with what Gary's saying. I've got friends who actually drive. They're contracted by the hospital and they're given routes. And one of them goes down to Tamarunui, to pick up people to bring them to hospital and then take them back again. That's what happens. It's funded by the hospital. It's nothing to do with the community service. And if people are registered as being medically having an appointment somewhere, that service is already provided to them as part of the DHB, or not the DHB, but the hospital service.
Gary, do you want to write a reply?
Write a reply on that one. Absolutely. The that system is so heavily overloaded, and I agree, Chris. I totally support it. And as Phil knows, that the others, that the calls that come in where people are having trouble accessing the system, which is there, and yeah, no.
Cool. Yeah, no, thanks for that. Obviously differing views, maybe, no, Chris, I'll just sum up.
All day if you really want
Yeah,
to.
no, I don't want to, because we're going to finish now for lunch. But just from what I've heard is that there is real interest in this area. And as we work in partnership with DHB, NZ Health, we can fill those gaps with community transport, maybe where that is needed. So just an action point from this community transport is that we will review the policy and give that comfort of governance oversight for that fund moving forward, and that will happen before the end of the financial year to influence the following year's annual plan. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for this morning and the great discussion that we've had. We've got a lot of things in the parking lot for the next meeting in February. We will break for half an hour for lunch, and then at 12:30 we're back with our externals for a PEC session. And yeah, we will go from there.
Angela, within 20 seconds of time.
Of course.
20 seconds.
Of course. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to staff.